You're listening to the Woman of Value podcast. You are about to hear the story of a woman who is following her dreams and passions and creating positive change in the world.
My guest today is LiYana Silver. I love this woman. She works with success-minded women who have lost or buried parts of themselves in the hustle of work, love, and life. Women who want those parts back totally relate to this. LiYana's mentoring and teaching supports women to feel confident in their leadership, clear about their value, comfortable in their own skin, and actually able to enjoy their accomplishments. What a lovely mission you have, LiYana.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
I first met you many years ago. Well, sort of met you, but you came on my radar and I so resonated with your work. You were on a summit and you had a program available called The Man Whisperer, and I ordered it and listened to it, and I was totally addicted to the way you teach. This was a program about how to understand men, and it really kind of just opened up my eyes to so many things that I had misunderstood about men and myself. And you're a very gentle, compassionate teacher. And I love watching how you've evolved and grown. And when your book came out, The Feminine Genius, which I have a copy of right here, I had to get a copy because it really aligns with my message of the wisdom of women, women's empowerment, helping women be all they can be. So tell us, what is a woman of value to you?
To me, it's completely, first and foremost, inner sourced from inside the woman, that she is deeply rooted in contact with her value. And I know I kind of just defined a term by using the term, but I think we often are encouraged to measure our value based on how we look and on our successes, or, are we climbing up the career path we want to be climbing up? And that external measuring is poison. And I think that, so to me, what makes a woman valuable is for her to, I think what can happen is sometimes she finds it by looking in the least likely place, in the place that is really uncomfortable, or a place of doubt, or a place that she just wishes no one would ever see, and to instead of looking away, lean in. And in that process, which is probably the most brave process we can do as human beings, something emerges which cannot be taken from you and kind of never leaves. And it is a sense of your wholeness and core goodness and value.
That's a beautiful description, and so rare that people are willing to look in those dark places, to go to some place that makes them feel sad or angry. Anger is something we stay away from. And women in my industry, both as a women's empowerment coach and also as a dating and relationship coach, I hear the word flawed a lot. I just got off a call with my coaching group, and one of the women said, in spite of my flaws, I am a lovable person or something. And I wanted her to see that the word flaw is flawed.
Right.
And that it's in those wounds, in those deep wounded places, that our greatest gifts are. And I know that you've gone to the darker places. You talk about it in your book, to a really dark place. Let's talk about that for a moment, because we're here.
Yeah, let's
go there. So tell us, what happened and how did you work your way through that?
Well, let's see, goodness. So the circumstances in my life were that there was, physically, I had a very complicated labor and birth process, and had an unwanted emergency C-section. It's the only operation I've ever had. And then started being a new mom from that place of serious surgery. I mean, people come through it all the time, but it's impactful for the body. So I was incredibly weakened, and then, didn't sleep for more than 2 or 3 hours at a time for the next 9 months. And that just set off a cascade of physical things. It pulled on the weaknesses that I had created, or they were there constitutionally throughout my life. And so there was a period of time where things really fell apart. They fell apart in my body. I had panic attacks, which I didn't even know what to name them. I had insomnia. I had all kinds of storms of emotions. It was very hard on the people around me. It was very hard on my marriage. It was very hard on my friendships. And it took me 2 years of working with different healers to understand what was going on. I think there's some really clear parlance of what I would be called a WOMI, WOMI, woman with a mysterious illness. And it's not mysterious anymore. There's so much understanding of what goes on in terms of our connection with our endocrine system and our emotions, et cetera. But I always like to do things before anybody else does, like be a little bit too soon for the party, I guess. So I think what happened was in the worst of the worst of those times, a friend of mine said, why don't you, something that's helped me is, I think it was When Things Fall Apart, which is written by Pema Chodron, who I just found out lived, before she became a nun, lived in my hometown. So now I feel like I can claim her as my personal saint. So, which I already did, but now I really feel like I can. So I feel like she is actually like a living portal to some really great stuff. And so her advice about when things fall apart, when things are very difficult, is to lean in. And her words, I believe, are something like, if there's a feeling you'd rather run from, let it pierce you to the bone. I might be paraphrasing, but that's how it landed for me. And so I took that advice and I took the feel. So I did 2 things. There was something I did physically and there was something I did emotionally. And physically, I let the sensations of the emotion, which I think was blame, which is not really emotion, but it's a complex emotion. The way I was blaming other people or blaming myself, and just let that storm wash over me, and imagined it piercing me to the bone, and had to imagine I might die from this, and I'm willing to go ahead and fall on that sword. And I remembered advice from another mentor who said that this life cycle of an emotion is about 2 minutes, unless we fight it, unless we run from it, or unless we kind of feed it with story. And so I was like, okay, let me just see if I can stay alive for these 2 minutes. And it had a life cycle. It had a completion. There was a moment where I could come up and breathe, and something absolutely had completed. And then there was availability for me to say, if this wasn't a flaw, if this was something wise, which is a stance I have unwaveringly 100% for every single client I work with. And so I thought, what if I could apply it to me too? To this really ugly, painful emotion. If it wasn't just bad and wrong and flawed, there was wisdom here, what would that be? And I like to anthropomorphize everything. So I sat that emotion down at the end of the table, like pretended it actually was a being, and had a conversation. And so then I was working with this feeling emotionally. And just to tell you a little bit of what happened there, blame kind of had this conversation with me. It was like, well, here's the thing. Here's what blame's for. Blame is like a sidekick for anger. And it takes all the energy of anger and deflects it onto someone else, poor hapless soul, until you can get enough grounding to understand what of that anger is for you, right? Like, it's so hot, you probably would incinerate. Let's off-put a little bit until you can have some fortitude to take a look. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me take a look. Anger's main communication is something precious and valuable feels threatened here. So very like a primal communication. And so this, you mentioned before, right? Women's anger. I am so happy when women get anger. I know we're getting somewhere when this happens, because this is what happens. Every time I ask a woman, I said, so you're angry. And if anger's communication is something you value feels threatened, what is the thing that you value? What's precious? 100% of the time, she says, me. Mm. Right? And of course we care about the other people, but what anger is letting us know is we have just stepped on a part of ourselves that we actually think is, we hold as precious, and it reconnects her with just a deep sense of self-love, which happened to me in that moment. So that really started a process of, maybe, I don't know if fearlessness is the right word, because it's scary to me. Like, the dark is scary. It's just scary. Vulnerability is hard. It's just scary. But I don't know, sure-footedness, it feels like part of what is asking to come through me, or the dubious honor of being comfortable in the dark, in the shadow, of being there with other people, being there myself. And what happened through that, aside from just really understanding, mapping what happens in a time when things fall apart, when it's just a really hard time in your life, and when it goes to the depths of being a dark night of the soul, I mean, has just been an incredible gift, which sounds cliche and sounds trite, and I wouldn't wish a hard time on anybody. And if we have to figure out how to make sense of what happened, there is always that transformation and that gift on the other side.
I can relate to so much of what you just shared.
Oh, right.
I appreciate you sharing it, because I think for so many, that idea of sitting with it is so scary. And I love giving it a limit of 2 minutes, of saying, if I can live through these 2 minutes, and that's doable. And I know, I grew up with a father who was bipolar, and he was very dark a lot of the time, very hard for him to come out.
Yeah.
But it was victim dark. It wasn't something that he was capable of really working on. The miracle that happened at the end of his life was he suddenly found purpose and meaning in his life, and he got better. And so he was in his 90s, and he became pleasant to be with. And it was crazy. I mean, it's not crazy. It makes perfect sense, but he found meaning again. And I think, just emotions they're all valid. The anger to me is so important. And what people are afraid of is losing control. If I get really angry, I'm going to lose control. And I mean, I think that's one of the main primary reasons that women in particular hold their anger in. And I know that at the end of my marriage, when it wasn't working and I was speaking up a lot, and I was doing it in a very angry way, because so many of my values were being stepped on all over the place. And so whether it was a doctor who, spoke to me in a way that was dismissive, that to me is a huge trigger. You're dismissing me. You're not making me valid at all. So it's understanding those emotions and knowing how to express yourself in a way that somebody actually can hear you is a good skill to have too.
Right. I mean, I think we can look back and go, wow, I really was expressing, not communicating, or, over expressing. It always is good to have refinement about how we communicate with our fellow human beings.
Yeah, but it's okay to get messy. And I tell my clients this too, like, when you're learning to express yourself, it's okay if it comes out sideways and sloppy, because you're starting a process and it's not going to be perfect, which I know you talk a lot about, that perfection thing. And I think that for a lot of people, perfection stops them. Why do you have such a passion about helping women who are perfectionists to really have more self-compassion and to really, transform?
So why I care is that it feels to me that there is a huge loss, when women are so distracted and fixated on living up to an ideal or being perfect. There is something she's made for, something that is asking to be get into the world, to be born through her. That's just like part of her essence, her talent, her gift, that doesn't get to get into the world because she's distracted by trying to live up to an ideal for how her body or appearance should be, how her mothering or parenting should be, how her relationship should be, career, etc. That her energy is diverted, her attention is diverted, and it's a huge loss. We don't get the creativity, we don't get the poetry, we don't get the writing, we don't get the way she is with her family, we don't get the new idea in tech, we don't get what we are on the brink of extinction as a species. We've got like a couple decades, right? Before we die in our own waste, pretty much. When I was in high school, I was studying yeast cells. I was doing experiments on yeast cells, and if most colonies, what happens is when they grow and they're not, when they just like overgrow too much, they kill themselves in their own waste, which is pretty much what we're doing. And the perspectives and shifts that are available from women, from humans who are more in contact with things that feel like intrinsically feminine, which is our intuitive abilities, emotions, feeling, connectivity, using the right brain as well as our left brain, that often is suited through women. Women see, this needs to happen in my community, this needs to happen in my neighborhood, this needs to happen in my family, this needs to happen in this policy. And we don't get that because a woman is distracted by her thighs touching, or the fact that there's someone else going to be promoted before her. And those are important things in life, but I just see what a tragedy. And that women are kind of the key to us not extincting ourselves because of the way we can see the whole picture. We're humans who can see there is a world to be that only you can see, whether you're a woman or a man or whatever you self-identify as. And when we're distracted by perfectionism, we don't get to realize that world.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. And I totally can relate to that. I think that, for me, it was about speaking. It was about being seen, being visible, and being afraid of judgment. And I traced it back to being in second grade. I think it was second grade when I had moved to a new city, and we were asked to read out loud. And when we would make a mistake, the kids would raise their hand. And so I would read out loud in Hebrew, and I had a Southern accent because I was from Atlanta, Georgia. And I think they just thought that I was reading wrong. And slowly I started to silence myself until I was so quiet I never participated in class. And they thought something was wrong with me. Like, what's wrong with this kid? She's not talking. And now I was labeled as shy, and now I know it was fear of judgment. It was fear of being seen and being made wrong. And that's a lot of what fuels what I do today. And, I'm wondering in your own life, like what's your story of your mission statement? Where in your life did all of this desire to help others come from?
Goodness. Well, I really feel there was a moment in one of my kind of master level coaching training programs. We were learning some really useful things about where core beliefs come from and how we can actually shift them in a lasting way. So we don't have to keep tabs on trying to be different. We don't have to put a bow tie around our finger. We don't have to write Post-its. We don't have to remind ourselves to be different. We just are. And I was talking about a belief, a feeling in myself of just feeling like being at war with myself. That there were parts of me, and I could name a few of them. There might be more that we come across, but just to give you a sense, I studied to be a dancer from when I was about 13 years old, seriously, and I had a career for 10 years as a professional dancer. And there was a certain point in there where I developed an eating disorder, which is like an extreme form of control, trying to have control over my body. And the problem was that it worked, and that I was very thin, and people were like very in the dance world. That's really great. And I wasn't a very good anorexic. I only lasted a couple of years.
Couldn't even do that right.
I couldn't even do that right. I couldn't be a perfect anorexic. And I really feel like my desire for healing and wholeness was stronger than that. And so then when I started to heal from that, I started eating more and started to try to listen to my body, and I grew breasts and I grew hips and I gained some weight, and I felt like, which is not, it's not the ideal body for a dancer. And I thought, my body is antithetical to my goals. My body is sabotaging my dreams. I live inside something that is against what I want. So it set up this, like, I'm trying to heal here, but now I can't really get what is so precious to me, and set up a real internal war. And I don't think that that's unusual. My circumstances are unique, but I just don't think that I can't trust my body. I can't trust that I am hungry for things, for food, for sensuality, for connection, for intimacy, whatever. I can't trust my body, my desires, my hungers. I can't trust my feelings. People are telling me I'm too much or I'm too shy, whatever it is. So I was describing this back in the coach training program, and he threw a little curveball, my mentor, he threw a curveball at me and said, well, so when you're at war with yourself and you win, who loses? And he's a very, very talented man. So I had to chew on that one for a while. And I realized two things. Every woman who is at war with herself is in it to win. Is it to win and have the other parts lose? Have the hunger lose. Have the, anger lose. Cut it out. Get it away. And so, of course, I wanted to win the war, but then I just really confronted, you can't win a war with yourself, and thus have something lose without destroying the whole. And in that moment, I think I chose that I wanted a ceasefire. I wanted to, stop making those parts of myself into the enemy. I wanted wholeness. I wanted friendship with myself. And so, I was wielding the war as a way to try to become perfect. Perfect, I think, is code for lovable, acceptable, valuable. And so that process of how do I actually be a good friend to myself, is what we started talking about before, is this process of, that's where the value is. That's where the lovability is. I see it. I feel it. Other people can confirm it, and it's really wonderful when they do. But I have to have contact with it first and foremost. Yeah.
Wow. So interesting what he asked you, and the thoughts that came up because of it. I've been hearing a lot about secondary gain, and so it's sort of the opposite of what he did, because often when somebody stays stuck in worry, in procrastination, there's a secondary gain. He flipped it over the other way. It's like, so when you lose, who wins? Well, no, it's when you win, who loses. So it's the opposite. Yeah. So it's like, woo.
Yeah.
A lot to think about. And I think that whole journey to authenticity, to the word pleasure keeps coming up for me. And I know you talk about it in your book. It's one of my favorite words. And I think it's something that women abandon a lot. I know that when I had some weight gain when I was about 19, for the first time I gained weight, and I was like, what happened to my body? And I felt so disgusted that my mother took me to Diet Workshop, which is like Weight Watchers. It was the most embarrassing, awful thing. And it was so not me. I remember people getting up and, my name is Sandy and I gained 3 pounds this week. And I was just like, I can't come back to this place.
Oh.
And that had me tune into what brings me pleasure. And I started eating healthy and I started exercising for the first time in my life because I was naturally thin and never had to exercise. So there was a gift. And it was before health food was a thing. No one was eating avocados or, sprouts. These were all like foreign objects. But I felt like I was giving my body a gift instead of depriving my body of nourishment so that I could lose weight. That was a huge epiphany for me. So I know this is a big question, but what is pleasure to you?
It's a beautiful story. It's a really beautiful story. Pleasure is, to me, little technically, is having your senses more engaged, that you have a richer experience of what you're seeing and what you're feeling and touching and tasting and smelling, and that actually even your intuition is sharper, brighter, richer. Pleasure, I mean, boy, have I certainly made the journey from having it feel like pleasure is the thing that feeds the hunger that's making my body be against me, right? I've definitely made the journey back into understanding it is a life-giving force. It is a very corrective force. It is deeply connected to our confidence, neurologically, neurochemically connected to our confidence. And for me, it's like a well-being in the body is pleasure. I think we'd have any kind of pleasure, spiritual pleasure, but to me, there is pleasure is just the animal of our body knowing that it is good to feel good, that pleasure and fight, flight, or freeze response don't go together. So I think it really deeply connects us to that, to a sense of well-being and being in the body that we have. Yeah.
Beautiful. Can you share an exercise that people can do to reconnect to their body? Do you have something that you can share?
Well, since we're talking about pleasure, let's talk about this question. I call it the pleasure question. So the question is really simple. It's the question you ask yourself, which is, how can I make this moment more pleasurable for myself? And just a real quick breakdown is, how can I make this moment? How can I, not waiting for something to happen, how can I decide what this moment needs that would make it more pleasurable for myself? I have agency. I have ability, right? So just an example of that is maybe I could open the window. I could wash my hands. I could do some deep breathing. But I can change my circumstances. There's something I can change based on what I'm feeling, seeing, touching, hearing, etc., that will bring me more goodness in my body. How can I make this moment more pleasurable? Pleasure, what is that? What in the world would increase my well-being? And so maybe we can just do a quick list, because sometimes that's like, I have no idea. I don't even know that I have a body below my waist, but below my neck, right? So I think that could be, is there tension I can relax? Is there something that I could smell? An essential oil or hand lotion or flowers? Is there something that I could look at? Could I leave this room and go and look at the roses in the road? Could I say I'm going to take a bath? Could it be that I take a walk? Could I stretch my body? Could I put on music? Could I put on bright lipstick? So I think these can be micro, small pleasures. And then the last part of that question, how can I make this moment more pleasurable for myself, rather than like, oh, I can make this moment more pleasurable if I put on a pretty dress for the people who are coming over. If that is pleasurable for you and your body, great. If you're worrying about somebody else's experience, let's hold that for a different time. But really, what is for yourself, really what's going to change your state? So what I suggest for, if you're drawing a blank of like, what is pleasure, even though I love that word, or, like, what is it? If there's anything from what we just said, write it down, grab it, keep a list of what other people find pleasurable and see which ones might be pleasurable for yourself, right? Like grab a menu, make a menu, and do some research for yourself. So I think that the question before the question is, can you start to notice in moments throughout your day where your body relaxes and opens and moves towards something, and where your body contracts and tightens and moves away from something? And that the things that contribute to you relaxing and opening and even moving towards something are probably good for your body, and they probably contain pleasure for you. Now, for example, it might be when you see a puppy, your whole body relaxes and you just feel wonderful and you want to go and like scoop the puppy up and let it lick your face. And for somebody else, they'd be like, I'm allergic to dog hair, right? They're going to get a no. That's not pleasurable for them. So this is totally woman specific, person specific. But I think that if you just have no idea what's pleasurable for yourself, if you can back it up a little bit and start to pay attention to the micro movements and sensations of your body, where am I more open to something? Where am I more closed? And that information of where we want to go towards something or relaxes us is precious information. Our body is so smart about what we need to be our most vital and our most healthy.
Mm. It's so simple and so deep and powerful. I love it. Each part of it, and thank you for explaining each part of it. It's like the commentary, because so much of what we do is for others. So much of what we do is absent of awareness of what really brings us pleasure, what brings us joy. I've had so many clients who have never done a thing for themselves, and everything is out of fear. Even when defining core values, they were all fear-based. It's like freedom. Why? Because somebody might take everything away from you. I mean, these are messages from home. And it's like, wow, let's go deeper and find out where these came from and how can we come from a place of love and not fear. Mm-hmm. So this work is so critical. And there are women who also are so disembodied that they smile when they're sad, that they can't express the emotion that they feel because they've spent so much time not tuning in. And a lot of times it's a response to trauma. It's a response to abuse, to not being seen or heard. And so it was a very useful skill to not be sensitive to every single thing going on in the world because it kept you safe. So yeah, can you speak to that?
Yes. So I would say that there's just sort of two ways we get the message: that feeling what we feel, knowing what we know, saying what we see is not okay. And we get those messages from a culture that would like girls and women to be a certain way, and that's not loud, and that's not expressed, and that's looking in a certain way, being objectified as pretty or beautiful or just the right amount of sexy. So we really get the message that our natural way of being and feeling is not okay. And we definitely get that as well. I mean, I'm a little biased because most of my clients are working through some kind of trauma as well. So I know that that's not everybody, but I really, do have a lot of respect for the ways that disassociating or becoming numb to what you're feeling, leaving your body, helped you survive. What a valiant part of ourselves that lets us be able to do that. And then there comes a point in some woman's life or person's life where they realize that is no longer helping them. It's actually getting in the way of things that are really important to them, like feeling deeply their lives and themselves, and, you know, knowing who they are. And I appreciate that moment of courage. I think that settling into being in a body is guaranteed to be the full range of uncomfortable and comfortable. And, you know, just, it's a thing to be a human in a human body. And it's just, you know, it is wonderful, but we can't have the pleasures without the pains. There's a beautiful Khalil Gibran quote that says, "The cup of our joy is carved by our sorrow." And one of the core roots, I think, of human suffering is that we just don't know how to bodily be with what we're feeling. It wasn't survivable when we were 3 or 4 or 2 months old or 10. And so we learned to not feel. But it is survivable at whatever point we're re-encountering it. And knowing that, I call it like black belt superhuman ninja skill. It is just, you know, so key. And we're not taught it except for if we really search it out from, you know, some book or workshop or coach or something.
Yeah. And the women who have gone through these tough times, who have learned these coping mechanisms and have come to see people like you or me, these are women who are interested in transcending the past and in learning these new skills, which is such a beautiful thing. And I think they don't always give themselves the credit for that because they're so focused on what didn't work. But my hat's off to anybody who is doing this work, because it's not easy, but it is so rewarding. So rewarding.
Yes, I heard this statistic. I might be getting the numbers slightly wrong. They said that a woman needs to feel 95% qualified before applying for a position or job, and a man needs to feel 50% qualified to apply for a job. I have a client, for example, who spent 20 years in an extremely abusive marriage and got herself out, is a single parent, putting both of her children through college, and has a hard time saying, I did that, because she didn't do it sooner. Yeah. And we want to respect the regret that all of us have, but can we please learn to celebrate these incredible things like this person is in coaching? They do want to learn how to be in a body. They have left an incredibly difficult situation. How can we help ourselves see what we do that's miraculous every moment so that we feel we just need to feel 50% qualified to go for our lives, you know?
Right? Yeah. So true. So true. We focus so much about, on the past and on what we didn't do. I think I was talking to a guest I was interviewing yesterday about criticism and how we can get like 100 comments. 99 of them are positive. One of them is critical. And we focus on that one critical comment. And so our brains are so biased to the negativity, and we have to really work hard at training ourselves to celebrate, to be grateful, to see what we do have, not what we don't have. But as you're talking, like the words that keep coming up for me are like wholehearted and integrated and grounded and, fully expressed. And I know like you have expressed yourself in so many ways through your writing, through your dance, through the beautiful artwork that if anybody's watching this on video, they can see the painting behind you. It's really allowing your creativity to go forth that has touched so many lives because you have put yourself through this process and you've allowed to step into your bigger space and to touch so many lives.
Thank you. Thank you. I will celebrate with you and not demur or not downplay, not only for myself, but for all of womankind and mankind and humankind. Yes.
I was watching Steve Harvey once, and there was a woman he was complimenting and saying, you would be an amazing mother. And she said, I received that, Steve. And I thought, women have to say that more. I received that. Thank you. Instead of, no, not me. Oh, this little
Right.
thing, I got that on sale.
Exactly.
So, LiYana, what are you creating in the world right now?
I had so much. If anybody would like to lend me a set of arms, I will take them. Right now I have a mentorship program, which is called the Embodiment Experience. And very apt to what we've been talking about is, just like fully getting embodied. And it's just the amount of change and transformation that women go through in the program. I took a break to write my book, so it's coming back after a couple of years hiatus, and it's just really moving to be. It's a long program at 6 months. We do a lot of deep work privately. We do a lot of group work and have a retreat, so they're in person, actual bodies with other bodies. Which sometimes feels strange in the online world. So that's coming up for me. And I'm excited also I just got the rights to record my book in audio format. And I love reading and the physical act of reading a book. I actually very rarely read because I have so little time to sit and read. And so when I figured out there were audiobooks, I think I went from reading 2 books a year to 20. So I'm grateful to be joining that platform.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many people listen to audiobooks now. It's probably much more than people actually reading a hard copy of a book. So that's going to touch a lot more lives.
Yeah.
And people also learn differently. So it's a great addition. And so the future is the audiobook. Any other dreams that you have for yourself and for others?
Well, I'll say this publicly. I haven't said it to accept, but I do have a book number 2, which it'll take a long time, books are slow moving creatures, I think. But it is on the topic. The working title is Mining for Gold in the Dark Night of the Soul, which is a chapter in my current book. And just to really try to do that justice. So that, I think, is a needed and useful thing to have in the world. I feel that we're in an interesting time where what people are resonating with is a level of vulnerability and sharing personal story, rather than learning from a bit of an ivory tower expert. And so I just, appreciate I think there is a powerful transmission that happens when we remove the barrier between us as human beings and can share from a vulnerable place. So talk about things that are hard to talk about.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to dive into that.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I think we're living in a time, it's a really interesting time. I think with technology, we've forgotten how to really connect deeply. We don't know when it's time to actually speak to a person rather than text them or send an email. There's so much misunderstanding in communication. People don't have community anymore except online. It's very rare to do what you do with the retreat and to really, have people come together, because we need that. It's a basic core human need to be with community.
Yeah.
And we need to get back to that. I think also with the Me Too movement, there's been a lot of the opposite happening, of people being afraid, men being afraid to touch a woman, to have to ask permission for everything. So a lot of men are losing masculinity because they're afraid to show up as masculine. Women are taking on masculine traits and trying to take over the world, which is wonderful to take over the world. But in romantic relationships, we're losing the softness and the grace and the femininity and surrender, which is a big topic I love talking about, letting go of control. And it's all just getting back to the core of who we are. It's stop trying to be something you're not and subscribe to something that feels right for somebody else. just to be human. It's
Mm.
it's a complicated process.
It's a complicated process.
So LiYana, a few more questions, and we're getting to the end here. And this is just a juicy conversation. It could go on forever, but we both have lives, and we're doing beautiful things in the world. So I know you have to get back to teaching. So you kind of touched on this, but if you can fill in the blank, I used to think I wasn't blank enough.
Well, the first word that comes up is thin, but that's lovable, valuable, right? Not lovable or valuable enough. Yeah.
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 I think most of us struggle with that.
Yeah.
And what was the number one thing holding you back from becoming a woman of value?
I would say it's an attitude of internal war. The word self-love is a great word. We don't really know what it means. Like, how do I do that? And I heard a definition from a therapist named Terrence Real. He said, self-love is having unconditional, positive, warm regard for yourself despite your shortcomings. It's like being a good friend to yourself, right? And that's it. If I could break it down that simply. So it is developing that sweet friendship with myself. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think of self-compassion. I think people are just so mean to themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, really, would you say that to a friend? I don't think so. And you've also touched on the mistakes that you made in the past or things that you've learned from. And if you can add anything to that, if there is a specific mistake that you made that taught you an important life lesson other than what we've spoken about.
The mistake is not listening to the message of my body, a version of where it contracts or moves away from or gets tight. To me, that's one way that your intuition lets you know something isn't right here. And so there's 101 of those I could name, those instances, but of not taking a moment to get to go, what is not right here? Let me slow this down. Let me see what is it that's going on here. What do I need to say or speak up for or ask for or notice? And that is easier and easier, but I don't find it particularly easy. So it's just a lifelong practice, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating to more and more go in the direction of what my body is telling me, because it usually makes no logical sense. And it usually, it's not like it ends in disaster all the time. Sometimes if I don't listen, it's not like everything works out and gold coins are showered on me if I go in the direction, but there's measurable ways that my well-being and clarity and understanding of my next steps is measurable when I follow those nudges from my body. So yeah, I'm trying not to make that mistake every day. Yeah, make that mistake less and less.
Well, I love the vulnerability here too, because here's a woman who has been on this path for a long time. You're so self-aware, you're tuned in, and it still is a struggle. And I think people need to hear that. I think people have this notion, and this is back to perfection again, that you get the lesson and you're done, and you're all cooked. And at some point, you're just going to be ready to then take that next step. But just knowing that it's a lifelong journey and just be with it. There's permission to be with it, and knowing that it's not like, oh, she's got it, I don't, because she's got something I don't have. Here's LiYana, she's still struggling, I'm still struggling, we're all still struggling, we're human beings. It's part of the process.
The whole cliche that the butterfly has to struggle when it comes out of the chrysalis, out of the cocoon, or else there's some liquid that doesn't get on its wings and it won't be able to fly. There is a certain amount of struggle that is important for us
Yeah.
to do. We don't want to make things harder for ourselves than they have to, but there is a amount of struggle that is good. That's
Yeah.
good for us. Yeah.
I agree. I think that we have to go through it. And what most people want to do is bypass. And I had a client this morning, she said, I just want to get to the other side. I just don't want to take the steps. And I said, I totally get it.
Oh.
And she knows she has to take the steps.
Yeah.
And it's through the struggle that we actually build self-worth, that we build the ability to do it again and again, and to do it better, and to know what we can accomplish. And I think, and I talked about this yesterday, actually, in this other interview, because it came up around dating. And I think with parenting, we often want to protect our children from falling and failing and getting their knees skinned. And that is how they learn. That's how they grow. And I was listening to Terry Cole, who's a therapist I follow, and she said that the majority of her patients are people who were coddled in childhood, who were not given the life skills to know what to do when things fall apart. And the more experience you have falling, the more you can get yourself back up. So we don't want to do it to our kids or ourselves.
It's so funny. I was thinking in the back of my head, my kid, he's 7 at this moment. And he said to me, he was like, Mom, would you want to fail all the time or win all the time? It's like, those are the choices. Yep. And he said, well, I would choose to fail all the time because you learn something when you fail. And then if you're always focused on winning, you just think about the winning, and then you don't get to actually play in this way that's really exciting. And
wow, what a wise boy.
Yeah. So, who knows? There's lots of messages that come from other places besides his school and his home, but I love that could be something that is real for him. And I'll learn from him.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
He's a special little boy to come up with that wisdom at 7. Wow.
Yeah.
I actually love watching children because they haven't screwed up most of the time. They're real, and their vocal variety. When they're excited, they show it. And okay, what is the best advice you can give to a woman who wants to become more empowered?
I think be a good friend to yourself. I do. I think it is unconditional, positive self-regard, regardless of shortcomings. Meaning you fall down and it's okay. You can be disappointed and you can have your heart broken and you can say, I betrayed myself. I muted myself. You can feel the heartbreak of it, but you still are there with yourself. You're not mean. You're kind, you're compassionate, you're loving with yourself, and you say, what are we going to do better next time, self? And that is a foundation of wholeness and value. And that is empowerment, I think.
Yeah, love it. Final question, LiYana. How would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as someone where when you think of me or around me, that you feel a kind of peace and self-acceptance and possibility. I feel this. I've never met Pema Chodron. I've never met Anne Lamott. I've never met Mary Oliver. And around their writings, or I've seen a few of them give talks, I feel that. I feel that my humanity is welcome. Something in me deeply relaxes, and I feel like there's just possibility. So that would be what I would aspire to be, that being, and that transmits through whatever I do, and that's how I'm remembered.
Well, you are that. I know that you are that to me and to many, many others. And I love this conversation. I love the work you're doing. I just think you bring so much value to the world. And I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I received that, Sandy.
If you would like to step more fully into your value, grab a free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Woman of Value on my website, thewomanofvalue.com. Just click the link at the top of the homepage. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to click the subscribe button in your listening app. And if there's something in this episode that inspired you, please share it with others, because the more we share these inspirational stories, the more women of value we will have in this world. I'll see you next time.